Good morning, good morning, good morning, good morning, people of LinkedIn. If you are watching us live, good morning. If you're joining us on YouTube, hope you've had a really good week. It's getting warmer. The weather's getting warmer. If you're watching us live, please do say good morning in the chat. Let me know how your week has been. Syed, good morning. How are you doing?
Good morning. Thank you for having me on, Cheryl.
Good,
Really good
good.
today.
Yeah, amazing. And you're in North London.
Yes,
How's the weather looking in North London? You know, because we're in the UK, so we have to start with a conversation with the weather, right?
absolutely. It's not raining, which is pleasant. Not quite as sunny as it was earlier this week, but it's
Yeah,
a little bit grey, but okay. I don't mind.
yeah, amazing. I was down in London, so I was in your neck of the woods on Wednesday, and it was sunshine and showers. It was the full
Oh,
spectrum. Yeah,
changing in
yeah,
between, but it wasn't that bad.
absolutely. Yeah, good. We cannot complain. Good, Syed. It's so good to have you on. And thank you for taking the time out for what is hopefully going to be a really interesting and engaging and insightful conversation. So yeah, thank you.
No, thank you so much for having me on. Really been looking forward to it, and really pleased with what I've been seeing that ERG leaders have been publishing as well. And it's
Yeah,
great to
good,
be out
good. And of course, Adrian, you're first in again this morning, actually. So maybe I'm going to have to start doing some sort of little prize or something for the first person that says good morning. Good morning, Adrian, from blustery Cornwall. I feel like Cornwall, you're kind of coming into the season when it's going to start to get quite warm, and you're going to get a lot of tourists coming from the Midlands and the south of the country heading down to Cornwall. So, Adrian, good morning, and thank you for joining us. And yeah, faith-based ERGs is what we're getting into, specifically Muslim ERGs today. But I think we're going to talk perhaps a little bit more broadly about faith-based ERGs. And I'm interested actually for anybody that is watching or maybe joining us, whether you've got experience of faith-based ERGs, you know, whether or not you are a person of faith, but whether or not you've seen them, because they're not always as popular. I feel like they're growing in popularity, but perhaps not as popular as some of the other ones, like, you know, women's networks, LGBTQ plus, or race and ethnicity. So I've got the incredible Syed Rahim with me. So Syed, there is a bit of a tradition on this LinkedIn Live where I get Claude to write your bio. So Claude off of
Okay,
AI to write your bio, and then you get to score it out of 10. Right. So Claude's
okay.
written your bio, you get to score it. So here we go. So my guest this morning is Syed Rahim, a senior change and program leader with more than 2 decades of experience across financial services, data governance, and organizational transformation. He has worked with some of the world's leading investment banks and asset management firms, and has held senior roles spanning program management, data strategy, and change leadership at scale. Alongside that career, Syed has been a consistent voice for inclusion. He's a recognised corporate diversity champion, listed in the Emerald 100 Inspiring Muslims and the British Bangladeshi Power and the Inspiration 100. He runs Cube, the community for Muslim ERGs, a network of networks designed to help faith networks find their purpose, share knowledge, and build collective impact. Welcome, Syed.
Wow. Do I
How
recognize
did,
that person? I'd say a
yeah,
solid 9 out of 10. That's pretty good, actually. I've been using
good.
AI, Gen AI a bit more, but not plugged it in for myself. So I think, yeah, it's got 90% more than of what
Yeah,
we include. Excellent.
yeah. It's a very impressive bio. I'm surprised he got it all in actually within the time within the time limit. Good morning, Muj Sheikh. I hope I'm pronouncing your name correctly there. Good morning. Thank you for joining us. Yeah, so I've got a side with me. I'm really interested to get into this. I mean, first of all, I love the idea of networks anyway. I
Yeah.
think they can be so valuable. So
Yeah.
just let's start there in terms of Cube. You know, why did you start it? You know, what gap were you trying to fill? And what does a network of networks bring? especially for ERG leaders doing this work in their organizations?
Sure. I think so. In terms of why we started actually, this is
Yeah.
our 15th year anniversary end of this year. So about 50
Wow.
people came together over a dinner. And I think it's sixth attempt of trying to get a network of this time. And this
Mm-hmm.
time, thankfully, it's kind of stuck and grown. I
Mm-hmm.
mean, primarily with all these networks in the employee space, it's about sharing best practice, the knowledge, the
Mm-hmm.
presence, having that kind of collective element together is really kind of key for ourselves. The
Mm-hmm.
kind of other element to that is having that voice, that agency that everyone keeps within their own space, but actually working together. The last
Mm-hmm.
element is efficiency of resources, right? There's no need to reinvent the wheel every time,
Yeah.
especially when others, and you can just learn from that experience, adapt it to yourself, and it's a virtuous circle where something really works. It helps others kind of grow and develop, and that's the point of it, right? That it's a more effective way of doing things. I
Yeah.
think the last element would be that community side of it. I think with a lot of
Mm-hmm.
kind of ERGs in that space, if you're doing things from an isolation perspective and there's careers fairs, there's wider community societal change, who do they engage? You have to know everyone,
Yeah.
right? I need to know to go knock on every door. You need a gatekeeper.
Yeah. 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 So many things that you've covered there, in terms of just explaining, why you started it, but why these network of networks are useful. And good morning, Sabina Hafesg. Hope I'm pronouncing your name correctly. And yeah, thanks for holding this session. Yeah, I think it's very timely, and I'm definitely going to be pulling more network of networks in, but certainly around, I think, faith networks in particular. The thing around networks, and the things that you said there about sharing best practice, but also just that sense of community. Running networks can feel very lonely in the organization, and even I feel, even when there are like a handful of networks in an organization, but still like running your own as the leader, co-chair or a couple of co-chairs, it can still feel quite lonely. And I think for the faith-based networks in particular, which are sometimes sort of slightly different, and sometimes the objectives are slightly different, so I think even that can mean that, certainly from what I've seen when I go into organizations, it's often the faith-based ones that maybe struggle the most to kind of get clarity of purpose in terms of what they're doing and how to go about it and all of that. So having that network of networks where they can look at, actually, that's what other Muslim networks are doing, or that's what other Christian networks or Jewish networks, etc. It's just so, I can imagine it's just really, really helpful.
Yeah, I think that loneliness element is definitely key. As you're saying with all the ERGs, right? You are
Yeah,
pretty much one, or if there's few of you leading, you're the only ones doing exactly that thing in your
yeah,
space. There's no wider department, there's no wider kind of
yeah.
engagement otherwise. And having that sounding board, that safe space, it
Hmm.
makes a huge difference, right?
Yeah,
To kind of inspire yourselves. And it is, as I said, everyone's got their own ability. I'd say the dynamics every place are different. So I've worked
mm,
in the Big Four, and
hmm.
everyone kind of says, "Oh, the Big Four together," but each one of them is different to each other.
Oh,
They've
for
got their own
sure.
dynamics, their own way of working. So there are parallels, but how do you do that? And if you've got no
Yeah,
one to lean on, where do
yeah.
you go? Claude doesn't have all the answers because historically the data isn't there. Actually. So when I look through it, I find it quite interesting to go,
Yeah,
we need to publish a bit more on certain things so that the reference information is out there.
yeah. Do you know what? You're absolutely right that there isn't a lot of data out there. I mean, that's one of the reasons that we actually did a lot of surveys of ERGs like over the last couple of years, because the data just isn't there. So I was like, I'm just going to get the data myself. But I think, to your point, I'm actually looking forward to. I'm going to throw a challenge out to you. I'm looking forward to seeing your survey of Muslim ERGs. Have you started doing any surveys then of your members? Do you do that sort of thing?
So yeah, so a few years ago we did one.
Yeah.
We formulated, because data is my day job really,
Yeah, yeah, yeah,
and
of
we
course.
sponsored a Muslim census element on Ramadan and belonging, and
Oh,
that came out with
brilliant.
a couple of key findings. One was flexibility during that time is really kind
Yeah.
of key and valued, and then the conclusion was something like, so those who felt more valued in the workplace
Mm-hmm.
especially Ramadan, were, I can't remember, was it 2 or 3 times more likely to kind of stay long term over the 5 years, right? Really
Nice.
significant when it comes to attraction and retention of people.
Yeah.
So if
Yeah.
you feel supported, then that's brilliant, because you're not going to get that elsewhere.
Yeah. Yeah. That's so interesting. I'm making a mental note of that. I need to catch up with you after. I think we'll talk about the whole data thing, because maybe there's a little bit of a collab that we do across faith-based ERGs
Yeah,
more broadly, because there's definitely a gap, I think, in that. Just diving into the comments momentarily. So Mooj is saying, I'm happy to bring my network in. I am co-chair of TPICAP Multicultural Network. That sounds great. I think you're picking up some new members here,
excellent.
Syed.
Yeah.
People that are really keen to join. Sabina, welcome, Sabina.
Oh
I'm
wow. Okay.
chair and
And
co-founder of the NHS Muslim Women's Network, which I just love the sound of that network, the intersectionality of it. I love it already.
that's brilliant.
Would love to find out more about how we can join the Cube network of networks. How can people join, Syed, for those that don't want to listen until the end? How can they
Absolutely.
join?
Reach out to us, Sabina, Merge, and anybody else, right? Just so we
Yeah,
are available on cubetnetwork.org. If you reach out to us, drop us an email, social media,
yeah.
LinkedIn, we'll reply. We do have a backlog, because this is in terms of
It's on top of the day job, right?
absolutely. So
Yeah,
we were always about 20, 25, kind of when we started from 50 people. And in the
yeah.
recent years, it's really catapulted. We're about 80 networks now, 80, on our way towards
Wow.
100 with the backlog, I hope maybe by the end of this year, next year.
Yeah,
And where it's expanded, I know we've spoken before about a lot of HQs being in London. It really
mhm,
is kind of national. We've also
mm,
got international engagement there.
yeah,
Um, and so it's a really kind of, the NHS is probably, so we are engaged with the NHS Muslim Network, one of the biggest in the country. So the
mhm.
NHS has about 15% of the workforce, 42,000 Muslims within it. So it's
Wow.
sizable volumes in
Yeah,
terms of, the impact of them. And you say from an
yeah,
international perspective, but small or large, from 2 or 3
yeah.
people, even a network of one. I've got a brilliant use case about
Mm.
how Sardis as two, one is probably one of the most impactful in its industry sector.
Wow. Wow, that's incredible. That is incredible. And when you talk about community, I mean that's the power of a network of networks, right?
Yeah, yeah. It gives us, it inspires us as well. We've been
Yeah,
engaged. There's been incidences you were internationally around the world. We had an MEP
yeah,
from Sweden come along who was just engaging the faith community here and going, after some incidents there. The
yeah,
UK has really held up. So Great Britain, actually, despite all we face,
yeah,
is a really inspirational example to others internationally, right? Because of
yeah,
this maturity curve, we are ahead.
yeah,
Um, and so they reach out and going, despite all the problems and challenges we have,
yeah,
actually, um, you are an inspiration in the
yeah,
UK with what we do with our network, small or large, because they don't have it, and they're
yeah,
jealous is the word used.
yeah. That's so interesting. I mean, there's a word, isn't there? You say about maturity curve, which I love
Yeah,
sort of looking at things through that lens. And there's a saying, progress, not perfection. So yeah, we look around. So we in the UK, we look around and we're like, oh gosh, this is terrible. But actually, as you say, others are looking and saying, actually, you're further ahead still. Do you know what I mean? There are things that have been done well. Yeah, that's really interesting. Um, Let's just go on to my second question is really around like purpose and direction. So, and this is the point that I was making around faith ERGs and where they can sometimes struggle around how to define goals, because the goals may or may not be the same as, for example, like women's networks or specific ethnicity networks, where maybe they have goals around, I don't know, representation in senior leadership or, whatever that goal might be. And also we've got, there are certain challenges, even sometimes around having conversations about faith in the workplace. So
yeah.
what does that look like? And for Muslim networks specifically, um, what does it mean when there is a clear purpose, and why does that make such a big difference?
I think probably about 3 different sides. So one is that the overall goals, the usual advice we'll give will be all ERGs are set up for fundamentally the same purpose, right? In
Hmm.
terms women's network, race, LGBT, ability. It's about recognition that we don't all start in the same place, and that kind of progress rate will also vary, right? And the firm believes it has values, right? To say, actually, we don't think it's entirely about pure meritocracy. We need to not just reinforce the existing biases that would
Yeah.
help produce the same results. And so as part of that, the first thing we say is actually look at what are the values of your firm, align what you're doing with that. And as
Mhm.
part of that, just as say I'm in change and organizational development, there's two sides to it. So you have a practical business as usual side. So
Mhm.
practically, regardless if there's a network or not, regardless employer big or small, there's some things that Muslims in particular with prayer, those who observe prayer, fasting, that they'll need and want to do. So there's a BAU side of it, right? To go, who are
Mm.
you serving at a minimum, even if you aren't formally recognized as a network, what kind of prayer facilities have you got? What do you do around practical Friday prayer? What
Mhm.
kind of food? Those are the absolute kind of real basics of things that would
Yeah.
happen regardless, but they still need structuring and can improve. The rest of it is how do you change? What is it you're trying to achieve, right? Is it you're supporting more people in the industry? So that example of a network of one, because this is
Mhm.
information that's out there on LinkedIn, they started with two really good leaders at Netflix. So Netflix Muslim Network. If you look at on LinkedIn, they've done some fantastic event. Their leadership is great. It's because there's not many people of faith within the organization themselves. But within
Right.
the production companies that they support, within the
Yeah.
writers, within the industry, they're all kind of small houses, a bit
Mhm.
like we see the same in insurance where Lloyd's has got syndicates, right? Hundreds of
Okay.
small companies under one umbrella, one big company. So in that space, their goal is very different to
Mhm.
the large companies,
Yeah.
in terms
Yeah.
of the biggest networks, over 1,000 people, some of the telecoms companies, one of the banks, or a few of the banks probably, and the big four and those consultancies got 1,000
Mhm.
people. Their
Mm.
goals are going to be slightly different,
Yeah.
depends on
Yeah.
what's needed. So
Yeah.
context, I think, is key.
Yeah. What I found really interesting there. So the book when you were describing about the BAU,
Yeah.
it almost reminded me a little bit of, I guess, we use terms like reasonable adjustments when we're thinking about how do we make sure that the workplace is suitable for different people that come in with different
Hmm.
needs and requirements, etc. So that's kind of what sort of sprang to mind actually when you talked about that bit, and then the alignment to business goals and what the business is trying to achieve and the values, and then the sector is really interesting. And I think for all ERGs, they should be doing that. They
Yeah.
should be looking at the business values, the goals, the objectives, across the board and trying to align to it. I wanted to just delve into something because the stat that you gave me there about Netflix kind of just sent my brain down a little bit of a rabbit hole, which I guess is around representation in certain sectors or industries. And I'm thinking, because when you gave me that stat around the representation in, say, for example, a Netflix versus, like, say, the NHS,
Yeah.
right? Is that what is it that drives that? Is that around the nature of a business like Netflix? Just I don't know if there's just maybe a slight teachable moment here in terms of why that representation is so much lower. I don't know whether there is
Whether it's
a
historic
reason.
demographics, traditionally where a lot of, in our case, for Muslims, where they would come from, that
Yeah.
you have talent there, whether there's systematic biases or just historic, the volumes of people who've come through. But one of the
Mm,
things we're seeing is actually demographically,
mhm,
things are changing. So you have the young generation, really inspirational. They're coming
mm,
through kind of expecting, and where they don't see, they kind of do, right? And that I think goes across the board.
mhm,
So that element of why it's smaller, it's I say there's an element of history, demographics, social
mm,
politics there. But the reality is once people are in, they're in on their talents, on their merits, and then
yeah,
what is it that's applicable, like I said. So you'll have industries that are less visible, less diverse at the moment,
yeah,
that things are changing, and it's the same reason all ERGs exist, right? Are
mhm,
are the employers trying to leverage those business advantages by increased diversity, and are they still
Yeah.
thinking about going forward?
Yeah, yeah. It is. It's a slight rabbit hole point, which I'll kind of just I'll back out of. But there is just to sort of like almost like finish off the point, and
Yeah,
you know what you were saying there about you know often people don't always go to sectors or industries where they you know they just haven't seen kind of themselves represented before. You know, somebody kind of has to be the first, right?
yeah.
Is how we sort of break into it. I think there's also that dynamic of especially when we overlay kind of like ethnicity with it. So, you know, we know that in certain ethnicities, for you know, as I know some people call it the global majority, but for a lot of black and brown people, especially immigrants,
Mhm.
but also some other cultures actually. Uh, there's the terminology that a friend of mine, David McQueen, sort of talks about the migrant four in terms of the careers that you're allowed to go into,
Yeah.
being like doctor, engineer, accountant, and lawyer. And it's like you can do any career as long as it's one of those four. You know, almost like, and then you end up with a kind of concentration in certain sectors. Do you know what I mean? You know, because of some of those kind of historical pressures. It's like at the moment, I think I'm right in saying that in dentistry, I think almost 1 in 3 dentists in the UK is from a South Asian background. So I think that in itself is fascinating.
Okay. I was
Yeah.
aware the Muslim statistic, I think, is about 12%, but that makes
Okay.
sense. Yeah, absolutely. And
Yeah.
of that. Okay.
Yeah. It's interesting. My brother is also a dentist. Okay. Let's go on to let's just talk a little bit about we've not long come off the back of Ramadan, which it's been really interesting. I feel as though I learn everything every year, I think, when it comes to Ramadan. I had a fascinating conversation this week. You know, I was in London on Wednesday. I went
Yeah.
to see the amazing people at Lush, you know, Lush,
Oh, yes,
the
yes. Cosmetics. Yeah.
yeah, I mean, I don't
Bathroom.
know. I
Yeah.
mean, their ERGs and what they do, it's
Oh,
incredible, you know. So yeah, I'm hoping to get them to come along to the summit and talk about this. But they within their ERGs, they also have like a what's called like a co-creation committee, and one of their top selling products at the moment, which is their sticky dates range,
okay.
came out of an ERG creation for Ramadan. Can you believe that?
Wow. Yeah,
It's
it's I've not come across that example, so that's really good.
yeah.
I've seen similar.
Yeah.
Publication companies have done similar where they've like
Okay.
our network can maybe help review what we're doing around books on these special interests and
Nice.
help
Yeah.
show, what have we got on the website, how we advertise.
Yeah.
So they are feeding back. But that's really
Yeah.
the sticky date. Is it a bar? A soap bar?
It's all it there's a whole range. There's
Oh,
like
okay.
now there's like body lotion, there's but like it went viral like a few years ago, it literally went viral. But it's now, you know, it's now part of their permanent collection and it's one of the best sellers
Yeah.
in their range. Fascinating. Yeah.
Contextually, it's both public sector and private sector. So
Hmm.
whilst there's been changes in the last few years around some of the private sector and sorry,
Yeah.
and obviously NHS is one people know about, but even I'm aware historically within the civil service, there's a
Hmm.
cost element, right? How you talk about datas and surveys, rather
Mm.
than going out to the public, often, we're aware that people will go out to their internal networks to go,
Yeah.
what is the view of this demographic? What's your kind of
Yeah.
take on this before we reach out wider?
Yeah.
And that is a really powerful place to be, right? In terms
Yeah.
of, it's not that you're making any decisions, but to be a voice at the table and go, actually,
Yeah.
I'm just employed. I'm being asked about
Yeah.
this, but there's this hidden value add to
Yeah.
the organization.
Absolutely. Yeah, it becomes like, you know, I love it when networks become like the go-to, you know, they become like an internal resource, right?
Yeah,
An intern, almost like an internal consultancy on that lived experience, which is that's part of the benefit of having that diversity
yeah,
within the organization, right? That there is a like a sounding board internally as well. So I when I was posting this, I talked about that simple moment at this event that I went to a few weeks ago during Ramadan, where the MC, when she was opening up, you know, sort of said, and there wasn't a big fuss made about it, but she was like, so I think the event started at about 6 in the evening, and she said, "Oh, you know, there are some dates and water at the side of the stage if anybody wants to break their fast. And then she just continued, and it was just I thought that's just so interesting. And nobody sort of batted an eyelid, and nobody was like, oh, that's like, do you know what I mean? I thought that's so interesting how the awareness kind of just builds. And as I sort of said, year after year, I sort of feel as I've learned more. So there is something about I guess the role that networks play in raising awareness of those types of things. And I know you sort of talked about that BAU element. How do we take that awareness beyond almost like the more obvious sort of calendar moments? Do you know what I mean? Like into the everyday.
Sure. So one question back to you. Have you taken part in any of the corporate, like, empathetic fast challenges, anything like that?
I did. Do you know what? Last year, I said that I was going to do the whole month, actually.
Yeah.
I got to about 3 weeks, and then I kind of just started to crumble. But it was hard. It was really hard. Like, yeah, it was. And I wish I'd done it this year. Sometimes the date just creeps up on me because I think you need to be prepared mentally, I think.
Yeah.
But yeah, I started doing it last year, and it just it's very hard to explain what it actually brings, but it kind of brings like a sort of like a clarity of thought, because it's a lot more than just about food, right? It's a lot more than just about not eating. Yeah, so yeah, absolutely fascinating. Yeah.
So you're saying, so when you say sort of key moments, I think there's two sides. So from that's a change thing rather than BAU. So the Ramadan would happen anyway, the BAU, and it's our busiest time of the year, that intense month. I'm really sorry. I'm extremely impressed that you did 3 weeks, right? People start one day. I think we're going to do a couple of days next year, and they're saying, I'm 5 years in, do it every year. Last year I did the whole month, whatever. But as in, they've been like slowly, but but that BAU side of it is fine. I think the change side of it is really interesting around what the networks do and what the allies do. Allies are really important in this because it's about the fast challenge breaking bread together. So that time of year, because it's most intensive for us, is that case of what one of the practical things is something like that. And it's easier now in these years than it was the last few years over summer, where people taking part and going, you can't really break bread at the end of the day because people are really tired, 8, 9, 10 in the evening, right? And you do dinner after Ramadan, right? It all sit down together. But what we've seen, I mean, examples would be the head of HR at Deloitte, right? Where she was live streaming. I think they even set up a TikTok account for her for it as well on the second year that they did it. But on LinkedIn, on Instagram, on the Deloitte account, what it's like when they woke up in the morning, when they're engaging, when they're, what they like going through. And they're showing what it means to them as a workforce, and it's expanded. We've seen that go through. In terms of other times of the year and the kind of non-Ramadan side, I think that's a case of what is that relevance. When you say about values, there's so many other kind of points. We mentioned intersectional stuff at the beginning of the year. International Women's Day, Refugee Week, Black History Month. What is it? There's Migration Week, or UN Migration Day coming up as well. All of these things happen different times of year, and it's the relevance of you to them and giving back, whether it's raising money for charity and saying, look, fundamentally, what we're showing is we all relate on a human level, and it's showing that. But for us, the element is from a faith perspective, two sides. One is that it's duty bound on us, right, where we can, to try and give back, right? So going back, and for those good causes, the ethics side is what we're interested in, and also that charitable element where CSR is giving back as well. So I think it all ties together. It's a big
tying it into, as as you say, it kind of comes back to tying it to those those business values, those business goals and objectives that are there, and then just all that, just the human element, right, in terms of human connection. I think it's I mean, it all sounds really straightforward. It all sounds really straightforward.
If only.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, really easy to say. Yeah. Good morning, Arjumans. Were you going to say something, Syed?
Oh yeah. So good morning as well to everyone who said hello. I think going to your quote I saw last night there's a Muslim author, children's author, award-winning, multi-award-winning, called Anjali Rauf. I think she won an
Okay.
Olivier Award last night for a play, right, on refugees.
Ah.
And on her dress was a quote that I saw and it reminded me of today. It says, "The entire world is full of hearts searching for a place to call home." From the
Mm,
employee perspective, right, ERGs are where we have larger employers, right? And we're all seeking that. It's not purely
yeah.
transactional, pay me for your services. And actually that's what we're looking for. And so, when we're looking at what is it you're trying to do, how is you trying to do it, what kind of home are you building within the firm
Yeah.
for not just yourselves, for the next generation, that's welcome to everyone, the doors are
Yeah.
open.
Absolutely. It kind of links back to Arjun, your point there about giving space for a voice, and that in itself is inclusion, and that effectively is what ERGs do, and networks like Cube. So I am here with Syed. For anybody that didn't hear the intro, Syed Rahim of the Cube network. Adrian, the point on co-creation, such a powerful way to work. It can promote safety, trust, passion in both directions, internally for the members of the ERG and for the organization the ERG is in. It should be woven into a kind of ERG charter. I think you're right there, Adrian, and it's not something that I often see actually in standard charters, but I'm definitely going to start recommending it. It's definitely something we're going to be talking about at the summit, because co-creation absolutely is where it's at. Let me this point's going to get chopped off here a little bit, Nassim, because it's quite a long one. Cheryl, your reference to BME representation in certain professions such as engineering, medicine, dentistry, etc., fits in with the aspiring combating theory, a phrase I coined in my dissertation in 1981, the educational and vocational aspirations of Asian, English, and West Indian pupils in a college. Oh my God, I need to delve into that, Nassim. I've got some weekend reading. Basically, you and your parents aspire to high professions in order to combat discrimination. Premise here is that high professions somehow will be less prejudicial and discriminatory. That's all I can read in the comment, Nassim, but it just makes so much sense. And I love that term, aspiring combating. It's a lot better than the migrant for, which was my unofficial terminology for it. Good morning, Sylvia. Anna, how are you doing? Yeah, that's so interesting. And the
It is
premise that
interesting as a
profession will
justification.
show somehow be less prejudicial. Yeah, and I think with some of those professions as well, particularly the dentistry one,
Yeah,
I've got a theory that I think there's something about it, because actually with dentistry, you're not even you're going into a profession that isn't in a corporate system. So
yeah,
actually, it's much easier to do very, very well, and not have to, as you say, sort of battle with some of the challenges around discrimination, etc. So thank you for that, Nassim. If you've got any other links to your dissertation or any other pieces, please do feel free to drop them in the comments, because I'd love to delve into that a little bit more myself. So we're going to get into it's interesting. We were talking, Syed, you were talking about maturity and where we are as UK. And a lot of people, my guess is that a lot of people, if they're in the UK listening to this at the moment, they'll be thinking, are we really doing that well? Are other countries really looking at us thinking it's okay? So there are, so I guess, two sides at the moment in terms of where things are. And we know that Islamophobia, in particular, I mean, hate crime generally at the
yeah,
moment is identity-based hate crime at the moment is almost out of control. But Muslim ERGs, this is a time when Islamophobia is a real issue,
yeah.
and there is a wider political climate that can feel quite hostile. So, how do you support networks to stay visible and purposeful without potentially putting members at risk, or almost like rocking the boat too much so that the work becomes too difficult almost to do?
Sure. I think that there's a few different layers to that question that you asked.
Yeah,
So when it comes to, say, the visibility point, well, that visibility point is between them and what they're permitted to do. So we, as an outside organization, as a community, can't directly kind of impose and say we run under Chatham House rules as well, right?
hmm,
So anybody I'm mentioning, the information is out there, but the that confidence, that visibility, what an ERGs, what Cube allows us to do is to advocate on their behalf, right? Behind the scenes and actually
Mm,
in front of it. So regardless of the Islamophobia side of things, there's
mm,
advocacy in terms of we've engaged with parliamentarians and different working groups, employee working groups,
mm,
etc., raising some of the points that they're unable to. We're
yeah,
able to often raise their seniors through the circles that we're in, some of the accomplishments that they've got that they're not always aware of. Then, not
yeah,
everyone has that visibility of the ERGs. But to the Islamophobia side, um, apart from recommending speakers and assets that they can go to, resource places for reporting it, the rest of it is around generally what we see is the trend is this, right? That society's got a bigger problem than
mm,
employers. And it should be, right? Because employers have got contracts in place. And
mhm,
so, whilst you do have obviously cases of, as the term now is, the official term is now anti-Muslim hatred, right? That's the one that the
mhm,
UK government recognizes, but both terms are out there, and we equate the two, right, in terms of effect and history and data. Um, that element of reporting it, it's a case of how do we inspire others? Because if there's a case, that's a case. That's just an individual's case as such. But it's more the advice. So when things have happened, so after the New Zealand incident, right? How do
yeah,
people voice on this? Or when companies have put out their corporates to say, look, we all feel sympathy for what's happening internationally. Are they doing that in the right sensitive way? So
mm,
we shared some of the best practices. We've seen some really odd behavior. One of the companies had put out this note to say in Israel and an area of the Levant, and it's like, really, the word is an area of the Levant. And so even like our risk feeds, right, from
yeah,
risk feeds talk about the occupied Palestinian territories, there's different terms so it recognized,
yeah,
like what is the norm, what is acceptable, what's sensible. For us, there's wisdom in that
yeah,
space. So it's sharing that to go, for
yeah,
Islamophobia there's this. For other community elements, it's sharing that
yeah,
ideas what's happening.
yeah,
um can I add one more in there, if you don't mind,
mhm,
which is, I guess you talk about internationally. So tonight I've got a meeting with Muslims from Finland, and earlier this week I met with Muslim professionals, right, in Italy, right, and this is based on stuff I did years ago for them in Switzerland, right. There's another
yeah,
group in Switzerland. People are behind, right, when it talks about maturity curve, and they are reaching out to UK. But it's a case of everyone's trying to do that in a way that's appropriate and moving
yeah,
forward. So we know it's happening and we've got those
yeah,
examples. It's just how do you put that out there, get that?
yeah, yeah, yeah. It's, I mean, the thing that you, couple of things that you said there that really resonated, the whole sharing of what's working, when, for example, there is a flare up. So something, as I sometimes sort of say, when things kick off in the world, which they often do, right? What different organizations are doing that works well, what statements organizations are putting out that maybe have worked well, if organizations are holding listening sessions, those types of things. It can be really
Yeah,
useful for different networks to know actually that's been done there and it's worked, or do it this way, and statements and things. The other thing as well, that I'm wondering the role that ERGs can play as well, um, linked to, as you sort of say, the anti-Muslim hatred and Islamophobia, and just the whole like polarization and that political climate. A lot of it is based on, there's a lot of like misinformation and disinformation, right? We're in this age of, just people whipping up fear of the other, right, and all of that. And I guess I'm wondering about the role of ERGs in, I guess, almost like demystifying and, breaking down some of those myths.
yeah,
And do you know what I mean? Kind of like, and not to say, because we never like to say that the role of education is all on the,
yes,
the group, the community that's affected, but it just feels that there is so much mis and disinformation out there about
mm,
particular communities at the moment. And I would perhaps say that I think in terms of the Muslim faith, there is a lot of misunderstanding that's out there. Do you know what I mean? What are your
sure.
thoughts on the role of ERGs in kind of almost like being the antidote to
It
some
may be
of that.
slightly contentious. I think again the nuance to this is that it's not necessarily the role fully of the ERG, right? You are going
Yeah,
there as an employee within our workspace, right? And it's not about defending against, because that attack, that misinformation, hopefully is not coming from within the organization, right? It's not
yeah,
from within your employees. So it goes back to, as you were saying, that consultative element. What is your
yeah,
organization overall, regardless of which faith they belong to, any or none,
yeah,
to say, what are we doing to make society more cohesive, to be better, right? How we
yeah.
counter that. And if we see that there's an issue around misinformation and misunderstanding,
Mm,
to give that internal launch pad. A lot of the ERGs will hold a session. They do lots of information sessions, but how well is that cascaded? So if I'll
mm,
go along to a session, or be kindly invited along to various events, and you'll see the heads of HR are espousing really what they're saying. Absolutely, their guests
mm,
fundamentally as a guest speaker. But where's the rest of the senior management? Where's
mm,
the team? Where's
yeah,
the element of cascading through? Or when we do our mandatory training, right? Everyone does mandatory training at large firms every
yeah,
year, values and whatnot. How much of that has got any conscious element to go, for those of you, whether it's Ramadan or Friday lunch times, all
mhm,
that kind of availability, are you conscious and aware? And if you're not, this is where you go to, because it's not, there's a lot of push around religious literacy. And to me, that's maybe a gold standard, say maturity is
yeah,
about what's optimized, including costs, right? So
yeah,
what's appropriate to go, here's where you can go, here's what it is, but it's allyship, it's
mhm,
understanding, availability.
yeah, absolutely, yeah. There's a really good comment that I wanted to come back to here by Arjmand. It's about it's about taking that human and employee-centric approach that then creates a culture to then create that home effect. And I think that was linking into that really lovely quote that you said about home, heart and home. After all, employees are an organization's most valuable asset. Absolutely, absolutely. And this is what it's all about. I mean, we're going to be wrapping things up, and so I'm going to be going like to my last question, which is about the one thing that organizations can do right now to better
Yeah.
support their Muslim employees in the networks. But I guess for anybody that's watching this, that maybe isn't part of that ERG but wants to know how they can either support. So for I'm going to ask maybe for tips for individuals then, and also potentially organizations. So for individuals watching it that may be thinking, I want to know a bit more about the Muslim network, and or just like almost like tackle some of my own sort of misconceptions, etc. What are the sort of resources that you generally point people to?
Okay, so probably a few of them. The action is the same. I think it's
Yeah.
about reaching out, right? And then once you
Yeah.
reach out, whether it's organizational individuals, sitting down,
Mm,
breaking bread together, discussing
yeah.
stuff, right?
Yeah.
Relating to each other, coming up with a practical action plan that's applicable to your situation is what
Mhm,
it is. Individual and at org levels. In
mm,
terms of organized events and resources to do that, there's various ones. We talked about during
mm,
Ramadan, there are events and education events. Again, these are not about so much faith. This is about the understanding of what's there. Go along,
yeah.
visit a mosque, sit down with your colleagues, and they
Mm,
can talk about stuff. If you've got appetite for it, great.
mm,
We've seen interfaith discussions where we've got those. What do we relate to? Human commonality.
mm,
Choose a topic and go, look, what is common across us all, to sit down
yeah.
and talk about and build those
Yeah.
bridges, right? So that it's about looking for win-win situations for us,
Mm,
for the businesses, for everyone, right? So it's what is that mindset you're going to sit down with to do
yeah.
that. When it comes to practical resources, just going back to some of the ERG stuff,
Mm,
there's no need to reinvent the wheel. You can come to the likes of Cube. I have about 30 different decks on a Google Drive that people can look at to go, if you want to know, about this from different elements. You've got one specialized for
mm,
sectors, all this kind of stuff. The information's there. Reach out,
cool.
ask. And if you don't know, that's the other beauty. 6 degrees of separation. I
Yeah.
honestly think once we get networks, we're at that. Within 3 degrees, you can relate anyone from, a side character in Neighbours in Australia through, a head of, within a state government, right?
Yeah.
The people are there. It's more, what is the ask? What do you want? What do you need?
Yeah.
That people will ask, and genuinely that they are. When you ask in the right way, people I've never seen anything kind of bad come out of it. Yes, it's yeses and nos.
Yeah.
It's
Yeah.
all a win-win.
Yeah. 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 You're so right. The way you said that, when you ask in the right way, it's because even if you've been a little bit clumsy in what you've said or whatever it be, but if you ask in the right way and the intent is there, it's positive intent, and the
Yes.
intent is to connect and to learn more
Yeah.
about each other, it can only be a positive conversation, right?
It's the beauty of any place that's got ERGs
Yeah.
has got that mindset that they're large enough, they kind of need to have that place, but they've
Yeah.
also recognizing, going, no, we aren't just society. We are building a micro community of
Yeah.
our employees, and that has values and worth,
Yeah.
and we have that understanding to rightly say that it comes with sincerity.
Yeah. Yeah. Absolutely. Perfect. Amazing. Syed, if people, I know you said, you mentioned it towards the start of the conversation, but if people want to find out more about Cube and connect with you, where do you live mainly? Are you mainly LinkedIn, or are you Instagram or somewhere else?
We're primarily between those two,
Okay.
LinkedIn and Instagram. We are on, everywhere. There's bits on YouTube and here, there,
Mhm.
but reach out to us on LinkedIn, probably the easiest
Yeah.
way. And then happy to connect. So Cube Network,
Amazing.
and there are, just reach out on
Yeah.
Instagram, follow us. One of the things we do see, people are often interested, FOMO for events. We did an event, we raised for charity every year, as do all the networks themselves. And we had somebody literally the next day, a partner of a law firm, going, how do I attend next year, right? So sell
Yeah.
out now, right? Because such a demand. So do reach out early if you want to attend anything. That's the main
Yeah.
thing as well, because
Yeah.
all the spaces go like anything.
What sort of events do you do? What's your most popular?
So our flagship event would be our Ramadan event. So this year we
Okay.
raised, I think, £95,000 roughly for 4 different countries. We had
Oh
a
my
mini
goodness.
sook. We gave last year as well. This year we give free space and stalls to diaspora from that country to go, look,
Nice.
people, really understand the culture. Same way, these are Muslims
Yeah.
who don't know the cultures of Sudan, of Yemen, etc. Right?
Right.
Necessarily, they're not from there. So we are engaging them and doing that. But then all year round, there's different kinds of talks, events, in person,
Yeah.
online, and engagement
Nice.
and meetings.
I love that. I love that. Yeah, amazing, amazing. Well, definitely, if you want to know more, I know we've got some people, obviously, that were in the comments that, maybe this is the first time they'd heard of Cube, right? So I'm really glad that people sort of came across this conversation, and hopefully we'll get more people joining, because then it means, there's you must know Sal, right? Sal Nassim. I assume you know
Yes,
Sal.
yes, yes.
Yeah, he's got that saying, hasn't he? A rising tide lifts all ships, right? And this, for me, that's kind of what networks of networks do. It's
Yeah.
everybody, by sort of sharing best practice and all of that, it kind of lifts the standards and the experience for everyone. Everyone has a better experience. So please do go and check out Cube, and definitely join. And yeah, Syed, it's been amazing having you in the
Thank you so
conversation.
much for having us. Thank you for raising the
Oh, you're
awareness. And
welcome.
I think, happy to also work with yourselves, support whatever
Mm.
is moving that space, and looking forward to connect again.
Yeah,
Thank
we
you
must
everyone for
definitely.
joining us as well.
Yeah, thank you everyone for joining us, especially if you've been, here from the start of the conversation. And if you're watching on the replay, thank you for taking 48 minutes out of your day to join in this conversation. All right,
Thank you.
everybody, have a good weekend, and I'll see you next time.
Bye-bye.